Hello there. You may remember a couple of weeks ago we were talking about the potential for some cold weather in late October. Well, that's where we're at right now. It started across northern Britain last week, got to the southern areas at the end of the weekend, and so we've had a return to some fairly widespread frost, the first of the season for quite a few of us as well. But that came after a very wet end to last week, and this is the radar estimated rainfall accumulations for last Friday into Saturday, the 25th to the 26th of October. And you can see quite a big swathe here of southwest England, Wales, through the Midlands up into northern England, where we saw a lot of rain. It rained for many, many hours, and in 36 hours we saw over 100 millimetres falling across some parts of the higher ground of central Wales. So a very wet spell of weather. It's been a very wet October already, and that's causing all sorts of havoc with agriculture in this particular part of the UK, with the waterlogged soils, meaning the cereals are running behind. Drilling has also been halted. In fact, some people haven't even started drilling it because it's been so wet, and not good for the rapeseed either, with the FOMA disease still particularly high at the moment, and it's not going to improve in any great hurry over the next few days either. It's dry now, but actually we've got more wet weather coming up later on this week and on into next week as well. Now, the rain obviously fell last Friday and Saturday, gave some flooding on the fields, but we're still feeling the effects of that water pushing into the river systems. So this just gives you an indication really of the tidal gauges, the river gauges along the River Wye in Gloucestershire. Remember, that rain fell last Friday into Saturday. It didn't have much of an impact on this particular part of the river at that time, but we have seen that lag effect of that water all draining from the high ground in Wales through the river systems and further down the rivers. And actually we breached the record for this particular gauge here, just showing how much of significant impact the water we had during the last part of last week into the beginning of the weekend. Now it's starting to tail off, but it's still much higher than it should normally be. We've got a long way to go to get it back down to this level, but hopefully with the dry weather continuing for another day or two, things should gradually return to normal. But some quite remarkable conditions across parts of the West Midlands and parts of Wales over the last week or so. Now, the jet stream was very active last weekend. Right now, there's not a lot of jet activity at all across the UK. It's allowed high pressure then to build in. Now, it's rather broken up at the moment. We haven't got a particularly active jet racing across the Atlantic. It's in bits and pieces, one arm to the north, another one staying to the south of us. Now, over the next few days, this arm to the south will try to push some rain into southwestern parts of the UK, but it gets steered southeast into Western Europe. So actually making very slow progress across eastern parts of the UK, for example. But by the end of the week, notice this bigger area of jet coming out of Canada, big plunge of cold air over North America right now, and that will reinvigorate the jet stream such that by the weekend, it's spanning all the way from Canada across the Atlantic towards the UK. Winds within the jet stream over 200 miles an hour later on this week as well, and that's going to spin up deep areas of low pressure as they approach the UK. So turning very unsettled, potentially quite windy by the time we get through to the weekend as well. So let's take it day by day. This is the high pressure that's built in over the last couple of days. It's still there at the beginning of Wednesday. We're starting to see fronts trying to push a bit of rain in to southwestern parts of the UK, but really a lot of this activity, although trying to push in, is bumping into this high pressure. And so it's not making much progress really, and a lot of the rain just shearing off to the southeast. So eastern parts of the UK still at this stage, going into Thursday, still mostly dry, although there will be a tendency for more cloud and bits and pieces of light rain and drizzle to gradually work their way erratically eastwards. But at this stage, apart from a bit of rain in the southwest, no great amounts of rain and still pretty much dry across eastern parts of the UK. But towards Friday and on into the weekend, we do see more of a push for weather fronts to come in off the Atlantic, bringing outbreaks of rain eastwards. There's our area of low pressure, so some stronger winds too. Showers then following on behind. Now there may be a very transient ridge of high pressure amongst all of this, but really the next low is waiting to come in. And really by the weekend, there's a lot of uncertainty about the exact detail about how things will play out, because there'll be multiple areas of low pressure all sort of rotating around each other, bringing the potential for organised areas of rain, but in between something a bit drier and brighter with a few showers. Now, to give you an example, I've picked one computer model here. We look at many at Weatherquest, but this is just one example of how things could look at some point during the weekend. And it shows quite a deep area of low pressure. Now, in this scenario, it's actually to the south of the UK, but there's nothing to say that this won't actually come further north and give some rain. On the southern flank, you notice very tight isobars would give us some very windy conditions for a time. As I say, some quite lively bursts of rain within this too. Now notice to the north of our low, the winds are very slack, not many isobars, and this grey shading here is actually fogs, just showing that all sorts of things that we could see through this weekend, and yet more rain potentially across parts of Scotland from this weather front too. So again, don't take the detail on this graphic literally, but it gives the idea that depending on where this low goes, which is quite a small scale feature, will effectively dictate the type of weather we get, not just through the weekend, but actually beyond into next week as well. Now, if you're trying to get some spraying done at the moment, there are still some opportunities to be had for the next couple of days. That's these green shadings here. That's where the winds are calm and there's no rain. But really, that all starts to get pushed eastwards as we go through the latter part of this week. More isobars, outbreaks of rain means spraying conditions will be quite difficult, I think, later on this week, apart from these very transient ridges that may push through between each area of low pressure. So it is going to be tricky to spray, and indeed for any further drilling as well will be quite tricky by the weekend too. So to get the latest information on all that detail that's going on, which will probably change quite a bit between now and then, give our forecasters a call. We're available every day, 6 in the morning till 6 in the evening, and we're constantly looking at all of this information and hopefully can answer your all important questions over the coming week or two. So looking a little bit further ahead beyond the weekend, this is for Northampton, the pressure pattern that's likely to happen using our ensemble data. Now you can see there's quite good agreement actually at first for this big drop in pressure by the weekend, and some of these models actually indicating some fairly deep areas of low pressure down to 970 millibars or so. So there is the potential this weekend for quite deep areas of low pressure, which would bring the threat of some very strong winds for a time as well. Then into next week, signs are that pressure might build a little bit, still nowhere near to the level that we're at right now. But overall, it's still fairly unsettled through next week. It's likely we'll have low pressure for the early part of the week. Midweek, there may be a very brief ridge before the next area of low pressure pushes back in again later on in the week. But towards next weekend, the end of the weekend, so we're talking about the 11th of November, give or take a few days, there are signs that there may be a bit more in the way of ridging developing. And indeed, some of these members coming up here with 1,040 millibars. So there's the potential perhaps towards the middle part of November for things to calm down just a little bit, but still a bit too early to say how much of a significant event that will be. In terms of the air mass and therefore the temperatures over the UK, this just gives an idea that we're getting a little bit of mild air coming in with these weather systems later on this week. So potentially across southern parts of the UK, temperatures could get up to about 14, 15 or 16 degrees for a time. Now this is for 850 millibars, so this is the temperature about a mile above the ground. But you can see as we go through the rest of this outlook, this dashed line in the middle here, that's the average for the time of the year, which naturally gets colder as you go further on into November. And really the red line, the average, stays pretty close to that right the way through. So generally speaking, temperatures will be near or maybe slightly below average for the next couple of weeks or so. There's no real sign of any major cold weather, but equally not a massive signal for any very mild weather either. It's more of what you would normally expect at this time of the year. Now that said, between each area of low pressure, we will get brief shots of northerly wind on the backside of each low, so that would give you an increased threat perhaps of a little bit of frost, but it's unlikely to be frosty every night for an extended period of time as things currently stand. But notice there are some signals for some pretty chilly air potentially from some of these members towards middle of November, but equally we could also have some quite mild air as well, so it's hard to say at this stage with any particular certainty. So averaged out for next week across the whole of Europe, this is the mean pressure anomaly, and the blue shading here indicates where pressure is actually lower than normal for the time of the year. Remember, this is averaged over a 7-day period between the 4th and the 10th of November. So quite a strong signal right over the UK for low pressure to really dominate for much of next week, giving us some longer spells of rain, but some showery conditions in between. So most of the rain will tend to be across southern and western coasts, where you are particularly exposed to these southwesterly winds coming in off the Atlantic, where you'll see the most frequent showers, for example. There will still be some dry weather to be had across some eastern parts of the UK, I suspect, over the course of the next couple of weeks in between these weather systems. Temperature-wise, we're sort of near normal across much of Western Europe, slightly below actually across Ireland, and actually with more of a southerly flow, Eastern Europe seeing some above average temperatures here for a time. But with that, we could see some fairly lively thundery downpours affecting parts of Italy, moving up through the Adriatic as well, and actually quite unsettled across Western Europe because low pressure is of course fairly close by. As I say, as we go further on into November, towards the middle of November, we're starting to see the Azores high trying to ridge a bit more across the UK, perhaps joining forces with high pressure over Scandinavia as well. So that may settle things down slightly. Low pressure is still to the south of us, and there's still low pressure off to the northwest as well. So it's a bit difficult to say at this stage which one will end up being the dominating feature. But overall, I think things will become a bit slower moving, a bit less mobile by mid-November. Temperatures near normal according to the forecast data at the moment, above average though across the southeast of Europe. And in terms of rainfall, you can see we are actually near or slightly below normal. So not completely dry, but drier than the next 10 days or so, for example. Still fairly wet though across through the Mediterranean, where we've got frequent showers and sometimes some thunderstorms as well. And then towards the middle of November, still that signal for this higher than normal pressure to continue to linger across parts of the UK. Low pressure still though off towards the south. So again, temperatures are not going to be far off average, maybe slightly below, with some quite chilly nights developing by middle of November, some frost and fog, which may be slow to clear during the days. And in terms of rainfall, again, it's the Mediterranean seeing the bulk of the rain through this period, which is fairly normal, and slightly drier than normal conditions developing across northwest Europe as well. So to summarize that, for the next 4 weeks or so, it's still going to be turning pretty unsettled by the end of this week. So if you're in the east, you're probably dry till at least Friday, but then there will be some rain by this stage, and potentially quite windy for a time through the weekend, early part of next week. And that unsettled theme really continues into the first part of November, with only brief, drier, brighter ridges in between. Probably though, towards middle of November, we may see some slightly more settled conditions, but that in turn could bring an increased risk of frost and maybe some slow clearing fog patches as well. So all faces of autumn coming up in the next 4 weeks or so. As ever, we'd love to hear from you. What are you doing out there on the fields at the moment? Is the weather causing you some issues? We'd love to hear. Get in touch. You can contact us via email or indeed use the hashtag WQ Farming Forecast on Twitter. And if you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our channel.